What's up, guys? It's me and Jennifer here today from Internal Astronaut, and we are so excited to talk about something that's really big right now. And we actually got this idea from a conversation that I saw going on that was about toxic masculinity versus the toxic feminine. And, you know, what is that? And why do we talk about the masculine more? And why is the female never in trouble? You know, and so I think these two ideas are very interesting. And so I thought we'd have a very short conversation about this. Jennifer had the most incredible description of where toxic begins. And we see it as systemic denial of self. Like, these were her words. And I think that that captures it at its essence. And it's so low that that can't even necessarily be recognized. How do you feel about that?
Well, the way I look at that, to me, the way I feel it is like it's so buried underneath layers and layers of generational trauma. And to whatever degree you believe that there is generational trauma is maybe the ways in which you can see how deep the denial of the self is and how often we have given others our decision-making, our authorities, however you want to look at that. And so within us, we each carry 4 generations of trauma that are passed on genetically through our mothers. And so underneath all 4 of those layers, think about how many years that is, how many generations that is worth of trauma that is passed to us that doesn't even necessarily connect to us. So it's the ability to get beneath that and back into the self. And that's the way I see it. And that's why, unless we start to look at the ways in which we systemically have been living in the denial of self, is how we can start to free ourselves from that generational trauma, which will allow us then to start moving forward in life as a non-traumatized society. But it's going to take multiple generations to begin to even start to unravel all of the pieces of that.
What you just said was so wonderful. And I think that so much of that generational trauma, you know, in the way that we experience it between like me and you and in communication, like so much of it is what we've been taught. And I think a great example is something you brought up earlier. Share that?
Well, it's the way in which Native Americans used to care for their children. As they were infants, the natives would carry them in the papoose, the papoose in around the mother's body, giving them comfort and connection. And when the child would cry, knowing that they could comfort them because they were with them. And when the colonizers came to America, they were like, lay that baby down so we can do the work. Well, the needs of the child were then at that point moving forward, the needs were not being met in a way that children have that emotional and physical connection in a way that they actually need in order to feel their way through the world. Because the way in which they start to understand the world is through touch and the mother's voice and the body closeness and all of those things. And so when we start to have our mothers go back to work when a child is 6 weeks old, and they go to a caregiver, when that caregiver has 8, 10, 12, 16 kids to manage by themselves, there's no way that caregiver, it is blameless. There's no way that caregiver can actually meet the needs of all of those children at once. And so then we continue to create multiple layers of trauma in the new generation because that child has an emotional disconnection from the caregiver.
Yes. The fact that the colonizers can simply be like, yeah, we're not going to do that anymore because this is more important. Like that being given to an entire body of people in words. And then that entire body of people just adopting new way, you know, changing and having to become a cog in that system. And so it's like, I think when we're looking at today's toxicness, it is so much about choosing the patriarchy over yourself, your family, your natural feelings, you know, like those little pains we feel. And it's like we've pumped ourselves up into running out to make all of this money and try to find the success and all of these things. But at the end of the day, you know, celebrities have higher suicide rates. And it's like a lot of the richest people at the end of their life, they wish that they would have had different priorities. And so we're chasing something that's not even fulfilling and beautiful. It's like a giant scam.
But I think that's like one way to look at the patriarchy, I think, is just by saying societal norm, right? Because we do live in a patriarchal society at this point, right? And so it is the society's norm to tell us to let your child cry it out. I'm sorry, but like that was completely painful to me.
Yeah.
Because when a child is crying, you know they need something. How can I meet that need? By picking them up, because they don't have the words to explain what they need. And so the ways in which we continue to perpetuate that societal norm by creating more levels of toxicity and trauma in, you know, throughout the way we interact is why we are such a traumatized society, and why all of these talks and all of these topics revolve around toxic interactions in the workplace, toxic interactions between the sexes, toxic interaction in every level, right? And so how do we see through that to get to a point where we're no longer denying the self? Like, I think we have kind of talked about the ways in which society has taken away the normalcy of the way we see feminine energy and the way we see masculine energy. I think we have that written down. Do you want to give us an example that toxic femininity has kind of come into play?
It almost feels very much like it starts with the masculine, because in our society, in a marriage, it is normal to place the husband as the above. You know, he's the breadwinner and the decision maker, and you know, even our religions condition us to let that be so. But what it looks like to me is that the men are choosing the patriarchy over their own self and their own wife and their own children, and they don't realize that they're doing that. Like, the patriarchy changed their nature, and all of their pressure is about the finances. And it's like the women have almost been conditioned away from their nurture. We've already established that they don't care about what's true within child rearing and giving birth and all of these things. And, you know, even 40 years ago, it was common for a woman to stay home with her children. And then it was almost like 80s and 90s, all these women gave up the nurture and they were able to go to work, and there was affordable childcare, and maybe things were in a climate that they could do that successfully. But today, women are in this position where childcare isn't affordable, and they still have to work because to survive, like, necessities are becoming more expensive, and you know, we're in a weird economy. And so women are in this place where they're at home trying to nurture while also trying to make money. She's trying to do patriarchy and she's trying to do kids. And every time she brings it up to the man, so he's like, why are you nagging? Why are you complaining? And women are at the point that they're losing their because it's been so much of not being heard, and there's so much pressure, like it's not working anymore. We've lost our support, and we're not being taken seriously. You know, why don't we care about how our children are being raised? And is that so much of the problem? You know, we don't even have time to intervene or to really like make a serious decision about guns and be like, okay, when do I stop sending my kids to a public school? Because nothing, like, and no one cares about me and my family. So it's just such a strange place, and that not being heard, you know, that is the nature, the nurture being gone. That is the being unable to believe in another person's experience. And that's happening to the children. It's happening to the women. It's happening to the men by the bosses at work and by their dads. And so it's like, where does it even the web
Where
of
does
it.
it begin to end? How do you
Right.
start to unravel all of the layers of this? But I think that's why the toxic masculinity portion of it is talked about so much more, right? Because it's not at the forefront that women get that expression. So when we start to talk about how, has the toxic feminine played a role? So the patriarchy has taken the precedence over the woman's voice, and that suppression of voice and not being heard is causing meltdowns because the level of expectation is so high. There's no way that most women can live up to that expectation and feel like they have any level of success unless they're completely devoid of any form of that nurture, which, how does that play a role? Is that why less people are choosing to have children in relationships? Is that why they're choosing to only have one child instead of 4 or 5 that they maybe would have chose before? So how does this contribute to the decline in the population? Is this natural? Is this something that we can continue? We were kind of talking about how this relates to us in human design. And I think this is the perfect place to maybe kind of tie things together here. Yeah. And so, Lacey, what are the ways in which you think human design can help us to stop living in that denial of self, and that we can start to see the way in which we can become our own authorities again and start saying and start putting up boundaries and saying, I'm not going to send my child to school until I know it's safe and there's common sense gun laws that I feel safe to send my child. Or, no, I'm not working 80 hours. I'm going to work 40, and that is it. So do you want to try to start to tie some of those things together and why we feel that human design can play such a huge part in being able to find that self-truth again instead of living in that denial of self?
We have to see that this is absolutely blameless. Like, no one chose to be taught what they were taught. No one chose to have to repress what they are so that they can live up to expectations of society, so this is just no blame and shame. And that is something that human design has given me, because as I came into my body, we are a traumatized society. That means we're all living up here. Nobody is in here feeling what it feels like to be in this animal, this body that lives and breathes and eats and sleeps and has needs. It has limitations. Like, these are all things that are not acceptable. Getting in the body and just coming to the feelings in here, they'll show you who you are. They are louder than the beliefs that we justify and we defend and that we use to blame and shame each other into fitting in more, and so just coming into your body automatically begins the path of you coming out from under these ideas and of you becoming your own authority. And it's interesting, right? Because I could look at someone who is a huge gun supporter. Let's say that I'm talking to a mom and she's 42 and she doesn't want any gun laws. But if I introduced her to her authority and she followed that for 7 years, we could have absolutely no idea. Like, this woman could live all the way across the world from where she started. She could have completely different relationships in her life. She could have completely different opinions on gun control and what she's been taught in general and children in general. So it's like, as you come to yourself and you start to live inside your body and feel its response to these things, you change. And the things that you used to defend and justify, they fall away. And the things that you've blamed yourself for, that falls away. And once you're not blaming yourself, guess what you don't do to others? You don't blame them. And then when we're talking about these things, it doesn't have to be a fight, and it doesn't have to be your fault, my fault, I'm wrong, you're wrong, you change, I don't change. Like, then it's just like, well, let's explore and talk about this, and let's just see where it goes, because you're not a mental construct. You are a living, breathing body that literally can't be destroyed by words, but the patriarchy has us in these fragile positions floating up here where what you are as a construct needs to be justified and defended, because all it is ideas that you've been taught that keep you away from who you are.
It allows us to find and validate ourselves for ourselves. And we don't have to make the justifications of why and feed into the stories and into the societal norms, because we have found our true voice. The way in which I want to see kind of us move forward is to stop denying our own truth. If you know when a doctor tells you, let the baby cry it out, pick up that child. Keep them next to you while you sleep. Support them. Be emotionally available. When a child comes to you about something another child said to them, take the time out. Stop worrying about that job or what your boss is going to say, and be emotionally available for that child.
Yeah.
The second that we can stop stepping into these norms and start stepping into our truth is the time that we are going to start to break these generational traumas that have persisted now for many generations, and start to make choices that are about nurturing. So thanks for joining us today, and stay tuned. Many more discussions coming your way.
Bye, guys.